Hello and good evening or good afternoon. This is the last of the nominee panels. Our video game has been now part of the World Soundtrack Academy for the second year, and very exciting. This year it's also part of the main ceremony tonight. My name is Thomas Mikusz. I'm owner of White Bear PR. I'm also on the leadership for the Alliance for Women Film Composers. And what many might not know, in my previous life, like 20 years ago, I was an actor, and I did voiceover and motion capture for video game. And as such, I created the character of Müller in Red Dead Redemption and Booby in Wolfenstein: The New Order. Still get fan mail. You're repulsive. I hated you from the beginning. And then tons of suggestions of what should be done with my private. So video gamers are very passionate, I feel. Let me introduce the 5 nominees. And we'll do the panel with some clips, and we'll open up to audience questions towards the end. Nominated for Tales of Kanzera Zhao is Nainita Desai, previous World Soundtrack Academy winner. The Outlast Trials, Tom Salta. Maclaine, Diemer, and Bobby Rose representing Guild Wars 2, Secrets of the Obscure. Congratulations. Slay the Princess, Brendan Boone. And for Jack the Lions 3, George Strezov. So I think there's no such thing as a video game composer anymore. I think, all composers work in different mediums, be it television, be it film, commercials. But maybe we can dive into a bit what the differences are in workflow, timelines, deliverables, and what is specific about scoring for video games. But I want to start with some clips, and the first one is from Slay the Princess. Brandon, do you want to cue the clip a bit before we show it?
Yeah, there's a little context to it. So the clip I chose is not from the video game. It's from the orchestral recording of the penultimate piece of music from the game. But it's a huge spoiler, and the developers never want me to show this part of the game, so it's purely just the music. And yeah, so you'll kind of just see like the orchestra playing it.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks for. Hello, 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 hello.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks for bringing that clip, Brandon. Can you talk a little bit? Let's talk about a recording session first. So how does it maybe differ from a more linear, from working in film? Is there a difference in the recording sessions, or is the workflow difference when it comes to recording? What is the timeline? Do you work on themes first and record that, and then you do the more gameplay music? How do you work on, and how does it affect recording?
This one was a little bit different, mostly because the game itself is very structured around looping sequences. So you constantly encounter a variation of things over time, and that's why all of the music is kind of built around the same chord progression the entire way through. So in a sense, it was all built off of the main theme, and then it brought up to this point where it's this is kind of the final encounter of the real form of the princess. And so it was just this notion of looping constantly. So I think that's probably the biggest difference in my experience, is like I had to find a way that I could constantly make this loop into itself, nonstop, forever. So, because you don't know how long. With this game particularly, the player can sit on the screen for as long as they want, and it just has to keep going through the piece. So that's the biggest difference, I would think.
And then you just mentioned the main theme. So was that something that you composed first and delivered and recorded first, and then you had several other sessions with different music, or how does it work?
Yeah, originally it was all in the box, and this was all done after the game came out, and it was more successful than we had expected, and so the budget got bigger, and then I was able to, get some live players in it. The original theme was very different because I didn't know what the game was going to become at the end of it, because we first kind of took it around as a demo, and so I had written this like kind of light romantic theme for the princess character and built variations on that. But I remember the first time the developers told me, here's the demo, but here's what the game becomes. It was so totally different that I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like a Final Fantasy boss or something like that. So it was definitely, I knew I had to change it up quite a bit from that point. And that's when I wanted to bring in, obviously, the live string players.
And does that happen to other composers also, that when you come on board, the game might be, it might develop into something completely different than, over the sometimes years than when you started? And do you start to storyboards, or do you get visuals always? So whoever wants to jump in.
Me? Okay. Okay. Let's see. Well, I have not encountered a situation where the game switched the ending like Brandon described. That hasn't happened to me. What has happened is perhaps if I was brought in a little earlier. The game composers, I think, I don't know. Sometimes we're brought in a year, 2 years, 3 years before it releases, and I've been brought in 6 weeks before it releases, or at least before it goes gold. So what I've seen is implementation will change. In other words, instead of us doing it with a looping system, we're going to do it with a vertical implementation, or we're going to change the way it gets, implemented into the game, but not so much like, the game plot changes or the whole thing. Usually they know what they want the end product to be.
Maclaine?
Yeah, I was just going to say I've had kind of an in-between experience where I've been working on something for a really long time. By the time it gets to the end where it's almost done, they mercifully have scaled things back so we can get it done on time. But I've already written a piece of music for content that then gets cut. And they say, well, it's already done, it's been recorded, let's put it here in a new map. And then a designer will come and say, oh, this piece you wrote for this map fits so perfectly. And I'm like, yeah, it was definitely designed for that specific map. Wow, I nailed it, thank you. But it's, I try to, I'm the ethos of work smarter, not harder. I try to never waste any work if I can avoid it.
Yeah, my experience is the total opposite. I find, the difference between film and TV and games is that for me, when I'm diving into a film or TV project, it's just chaotic and messy, and you're in for the ride. You're on that journey, and quite often, sometimes several times I have to do a 180-degree gear turn in the style and the genre of the music because they haven't found the essence of the show, the heart of the show, or the film, or whatever the project is. Whereas with games, on Tales of Kinzera, I was involved for 4 years, and or at least a year and a half or 2 years in my gaming experience recently. And it's just wonderful because everything is so structured and organized and broken down into milestones, and I know exactly what I'm doing and where, and we conceptualize the score for the games right at the beginning of the project, and it tends not to, for me, it's never changed. You go like, I know what I'm doing, and we just execute that initial vision right through to the end of the project. It's just been joyful.
Your game is especially, it's like visually stunning. It's beautiful. We'll watch a clip in a moment. And what visuals did you get in the beginning? Was it key art? Was it storyboard? Was it, what did you?
Well, I'm a very visually inspired composer, having come from a film and TV background. So here it is more challenging because I cling on to story and narrative, and then I say, please give me some initial sketches with this game because it's based on African Bantu mythology. I'm inspired by the fashions and the hairstyles and the landscapes and the colors, the color and emotion are very linked, and that intertwined with that is color, emotion, and music. So you give me the dry, dusty deserts of Africa, and I'm inspired by that, and that informs me in terms of sound palette and musical approach.
So let's watch a clip from Nainita Desai. I've never seen the chat with the team button. I have to scan that and see who answers that. You just mentioned you obviously you get inspired by everything from hair, from like the characters, the music. Can you talk a little bit about how you prepared for that project as far as research, and also if you discovered some new instruments that you might have not used before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love, my way into a project is to research and find the heart of something. And so I had lots of discussions with Abu Bakr Salim, who's the creative director and the founder of the game studio. And the game is about, it's a coming-of-age story about grief and love and loss, about a young man who lives in this futuristic city of Kenzera and finds, and his father has died. And he's on this soul-searching journey to overcome his grief. And so there were three apexes to the score in a triangle. One was Abu wanted to represent emotion and deep, dark emotions that young people find hard to confront. It's not something that we talk about, these sort of unveiling our darkest sides, and especially for young teenagers to come to terms with loss. So how do we do that? How do we achieve that musically? And that was through the use of the orchestra, which is a very versatile tool. But at the heart of the whole thing, obviously the game is based on African Bantu mythology. So we wanted to utilize African elements, but not just to have a mashup of the orchestra and then ethnicity. I wanted to ingrain it within the DNA of the game, within the DNA of the score. So I put together a diverse orchestra, which took me a long time to find people, and try and get as much diversity of the African landscape. So the orchestral musicians were largely African, which we recorded in London at Abbey Road. Mm-hmm. And then the other apex of the triangle is the Bantu mythology, the shamanic folklore mythology of African culture. And so for that, I researched and found fantastic African soloists who could bring their creativity. So they would come to my studio where I used the kora, an African harp. I used West African musicians, a djembe, master djembe player, a kora player, a fuller flute. And a lot of these musicians, none of them read music. And so, music is this universal language that we use to work. I would sing them little melodies and then they would interpret it in their way and then perform it on the score. And then I found an amazing choir, 2 choirs. As a great producer friend, J.B. Arthur, who I know that George has worked with as well. And he recorded an 8-piece choir for me. To get emotional heart, I wrote lyrics in English that are connected to the game. And then my parents, who were brought up in Africa, in Kenya and South Africa, and I've been to Africa quite a few times through my life, they translated it into Zulu and Swahili so that the choirs in Africa performed, amazing soloists that performed, the heart of this game. And then I recorded a choir in London called Vocality, who performed on Black Panther, and they did the big epic choral material. And then Afrofuturism, and I loved doing research on that and bringing in really contemporary, dark, gritty, edgy, modern synths. And the score is a mashup of that. And recording with the orchestra at Abbey Road, there's a famous double bass player. Her name is Mary Scully. She's played on loads of film sessions. And the parts that I wrote for the strings were so complicated rhythmically because I was giving the string players and the brass players African rhythms, which were really multi-layered, complex rhythms that they could barely play them. And they had steam coming out of their ears in the sessions. Thank you, Nainita, for writing really complicated music for us, because normally double bass players are just playing eggs with just long notes. So that was a lot of fun.
This sounds like a lot of fun, this project. You talked earlier about how you find inspiration when writing by the visuals, obviously, and I want to open it up a bit to the round how where you find your inspiration when writing for video games. Is it the story, the video game? Is it initial conversations with the director? Is it outside of the video game, maybe?
Well, I would like to say that since I'm also wearing both hats as a film composer and also a game composer, I think that the biggest difference is that with games, most of the times, as you said, you get the luxury of time, of being able to experiment with different things. When speaking about Jagged Alliance, there are a couple of things that happened during that process. So the first one is I completely scratched about 50 minutes of music because of a financial decision. The game revolves around like this homage towards like 90s action movies, early 2000s, but when we started out, we did a kind of a hybrid score. So some orchestra and a lot of synths. And then we all came to the conclusion that, that's not enough. That's not okay for this game. And since Jagged Alliance 2, I played it when I was young, so it has some sort of a tradition, heritage already that we need to follow. And so we decided to record the orchestra, and we did about 2.5 hours of music with the orchestra, different types like battle music, ambient, etc. And then, because I really love working with all the artists, and I love going to the studio, not just receiving like video clips or concept art, or just I even have like on my Steam account I have the game that I can play, but I like to go to the studio. In this case, Hemimon Games. They're based in Sofia, Bulgaria, so I'm kind of lucky. It's my hometown. So I would go there and I would speak with all those artists, and that actually brought the African choral tracks and also soloists, which were kind of a gamble that happened at the end, and it was just something that came up from all those conversations, where your mercenaries would kill a bunch of bad guys in a village, and then you would liberate the village, and you have the animations of all those characters, non-playing characters, being so happy about it. And I was like, okay, can we do something that's interesting and unique in a way? So not everybody liked it at first, that idea, but that sort of creative process is, I think, something that's very valuable. Yeah. When you have the time, of course.
Just to kind of piggyback on what you were talking about, like the thing, like one of the huge differences with games compared to films is usually by the time I get a film, we're running out of time. It's like, oh, it's doing like 3 weeks. Here's the final product. It's all there. Maybe some of the, the special effects aren't there. But with games, I've had as little as like, here's a piece of paper with the script and a general idea. I've had things that are almost similar to film where like, it's all kind of there. And so on the earlier example, you kind of just want to gather as much information as possible, whether it's, talking with the writer, seeing what the script is like, talking, like maybe getting a gameplay clip that's like just 10 seconds just to like see what that world's like, getting as many visuals as you can just to make sure that because you have to kind of capture this whole world, like, with the music. You're not necessarily scoring individual points. You have to uncover this entire, like, it's not just a moment in time like a film where it's like, this is where the guy gets punched in the face right there. Like, they might be listening to this track or walking around this like big open area for 40 minutes. Like, and so just being able to tap into as many different pieces of information as possible.
Do you somehow keep that in your mind when scoring for video game, that the gamer actually listens to that music for hours and hours and hours, and it's not just like a moment like in a film, but like you have to write music that someone does not get like annoyed with?
Yeah, all the time. And I think that's probably, I don't know, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but just generally what makes the medium, writing for the medium much more interesting to me. I'm going to say that it's a little, this is sort of a pejorative, a lightly pejorative term that we use in games, which is movies and TV we call them traditional linear media. Like, okay, you know, that's how it's sort of all in the past. We figured that out. It's like it's in 2 dimensions, whereas in games that we operate in 3 dimensions. And the most advanced games, which I'm sure all of us have worked on a kind of a spectrum of these, can go from just, you walking over some beautiful vista and you hear a single track that plays and then it drifts off as it finishes, or it can be as interactive as you want it to be, and that's truly what separates the mediums, right? The end product can sound similar. You can go to Abbey Road and record with an orchestra, but in order to alleviate that boredom or monotony, you record everything in pieces, both what Tom was kind of hinting at, vertically and horizontally, which are terms we use to describe how these interactive pieces get put together. And a game like a Sony PlayStation game, like a God of War or something that has 3 hours of music, they have these incredible dedicated implementers that will take that 3 hours and turn it into 8 hours or 9 hours of music. And for exactly that reason, because you have to kind of keep it fresh the whole time. And it's, to me, is what makes the medium much more interesting to work in personally.
Let's stay with you. Do you want to cue in? You have a very epic cue that you brought. So
sure. Can we turn it up? Can we get it a little bit louder?
Yep.
Yeah. So I work in a game called Guild Wars 2, and I've worked on this particular iteration of Guild Wars 2 with Bobby. Guild Wars 2. It's a long-running fantasy MMO, massively multiplayer online role-playing game like World of Warcraft. And this is just the launch trailer. You'll see some kind of title cards of new features that would be very exciting if you were a long-time player. You can ignore those. But I kind of just stripped everything out and put the main theme over it. I can talk about it more afterwards if you want.
Yeah, if you want to talk a little bit more about the game, but also this is a game that has a lot of different lands and less mystical creatures. And can you talk also a little bit about a game such as that, where you have to, do you write different themes for every land, for every race, and how do you keep track? That gets sometimes overwhelming, maybe?
Yes, it does. So I've been working on the game for 12 years, writing music for it, and truly, until I did a talk earlier this year where I had to do sort of a postmortem about that. It was the first time I'd ever added up all of the music that's in the game, and there's 18 hours of music in the game, and truly stuff that I've forgotten. I was, wow, I wrote that. I don't remember that. That was pretty good. But the challenge with that, and I want to touch on maybe finding inspiration, because it can be very difficult to find new inspiration on something that you're, have been working on for. So it's like a blessing and a curse. A steady gig as a composer, blessing. 12 years of kind of coming up with new epic themes. Everything's got to be more epic than the last thing is tricky. So for this one, this was the first time we're going to this new area. It's the culmination. I'm sorry. The previous expansion was the culmination of a 10-year-long storyline. Great. We sort of wrapped that up with a nice bow. I jettisoned all those themes and motifs and all that kind of stuff, and I had to start fresh on this one. And this area that you kind of see them flying around and stuff, it's the first time in the game where the word wizard is spoken. We're on the wizard's tower. And you think, well, it's a fantasy game. It should be easy to write for wizards. But it's almost like in a zombie show, they never say the word zombie. So it was kind of it was like cognitive dissonance, where I'm like, a wizard. There's wizards in my Magic game. It's very strange. So the thing about the word wizard is it immediately conjures Harry Potter, right? It's just like such a strong association. I thought we have to go so far in the other direction. How do we explore mysticism musically without dum dum da dum 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 dum? So we had to find a new avenue, and for me that was stretching the tonality, doing for the music geeks in the audience, polytonality or extended harmony, whatever you want to call it. There's a little bit of that in the trailer, but that to me was the sort of way of saying we're in this realm that is attached to the terrestrial realm, but almost sitting on top of it, right? Literally this floating island with a wizard's tower on it. That was my way into this particular project. And then it has all the same sort of leitmotif stuff that other projects do. And I have a kind of a little glossary of themes that I go back to, because I know that if I don't return to them at the right time, some fan who is like a little musical detective is gonna be like, this is this level that had so and so, and they're but then what's rewarding about that is when I feel like, okay, I'm gonna bury this one in there. Someone finds it like on day one. They say, oh, it's so cool. They like took the first half of this person's motif and like played it backwards and flipped it upside down, and it's like award them a point. Great job.
Bobby, how was it for you working on that?
It was almost like the exact opposite problem that you had in terms of like, it's like jumping into Star Wars on movie 8, being like, hey, score this. And it's like, so like there's this long history of like this game that's been around for so long, and so you want to capture that sound, you want to be, make sure it lives in the same world. At the same time, it's like, well, you also have to be different. So you want to bring, which I guess comes a little easier because naturally as a different composer, I'm just going to have a bit difference to me. And then that in turn has the other issue of like, well, so you have these different composers. You do need it to all sound like one project, one voice, essentially, mixed with all these different, so I guess a choir. But yeah, so it was exciting, like, because you do have all this stuff to kind of listen to, reference, use as kind of a springboard, but at the same time, you want to bring something new to the table, also capture this new world. So it was exciting for sure. That's.
What about the rest of you? Have you worked on a lot of video games that might be part of a franchise where there was pre-existing themes, obviously, and how much do you have to then incorporate those themes, stay in this world, and still be able to show an individual touch and bring your own creativity to it? And do you find that more limiting, or is it, Tom?
Okay. Hello. So yeah, I had a very interesting, probably once in a lifetime experience while working on one particular franchise that I came into a decade later, which had a bit of a gravitas to it. It's called Halo. And so I worked on 6 Halo titles, and some of them were recreations of the original score, like in Combat Evolved and in Halo 2, part of the Master Chief Collection, where I had the privilege of doing a note-per-note transcription of the entire thing. And I was part of a team of composers. My job was all the percussion and all the melodic synth stuff. And that was such an education to give me a sense of the DNA of what makes Halo music. And I always talk about musical recipes and musical DNA and what makes it. Some of it you can describe and you can get geeky and some of it is just a feeling. So I really understood like just everything from the tendencies of the chords, the suspensions or the pedal tones, or just all different dynamics. I noticed the Celtic influence, I noticed the tribal influence, I noticed the sacred influence, I noticed all these different unique combinations in proportion. And so by the time I got around to working on Spartan Assault, it was very intimidating because I was playing as a fan in 2001, and then 2011, now the spotlight's on me, and I have like all the fans watching, like, what did you just do? What'd you do, Microsoft? And I'm like, oh my God, there's gonna be like, so it was a bit intimidating, but fortunately it seemed to really be received well, and I see people non-musicians using the word. It had that legacy sound. It had the sound of the original. Now that's what it's supposed to be like. I'm like, interesting, okay. So that kind of research pays off, and it's important to know how to navigate that so that as us as composers, right, we have to be able to do both. We have to put on a mask and become a different person transform, and then sometimes we have to just have that most unique thing that you haven't heard before or some very unique fingerprint. And so, yeah, I've had this experience of both across that whole spectrum.
And I'm sure it's a combination of both sometimes.
Of course,
also.
it's always somewhere on that spectrum.
Tom, let's stay with you. It's exciting to have a horror video game this year nominated. So if you want to talk a little bit about the clip we're going to see.
Just close your eyes. This is super grisly. This is not my fault. No, this is the one of the more recent trailers. The Outlast Trials is one of the most terrifying games on the planet. It's a lot of fun to watch people play on YouTube because you just see them screaming constantly. So it is a lot of fun. And, you know, you can't take it very seriously. We do a lot of laughing and stuff and just enjoy scaring people. So, yeah, this is a trailer, and it's part of the continuing DLC content that they provide as they expand the game. So this is introducing certain characters. They call it the villains trailer. So you're going to see Mother Gooseberry and Coil. Both like deranged psychos, and you know, you're being hunted down to be killed. Basically, it's kind of like Squid Games on crack. In 1959, in some kind of scientific experiment where they capture you off the street because you know no one knows you, and then they drill goggles into your skull and have you go through this demoralizing, removing your sense of ethics, so that you can be turned into a secret weapon, a sleeper agent. It's psycho. It's really insane. Enjoy.
How many hours did you spend with that footage?
I feel much better now, don't you? What? What was the question?
How many hours did you spend with that footage, and did you work into the night and then go to bed, or?
Oh, hell no. I don't. Once the sun goes down, no more work on that. Yeah, only somewhat kidding. But yeah, it's fun. I've always been fascinated, and even as a little kid, I was terrified of haunted houses. Right? I remember being taken in. I was like screaming, and then at one time a switch went off in my little, adolescent brain, and I'm like, well, what happens if I make my own haunted houses? Then I'm in control and I can't be scared because I am the monster, and that led to this throughout my whole childhood and even my teens and 20s. Every Halloween we'd make haunted houses. I'd get my friends, I'd have maze lights, I'd do my own music or recorded it from games, put it on looping cassette tapes. Yes, that's how old I am. And then CDs and stuff. Anyway, so for me, just having a chance to do this is just like making a haunted house. It's just you're creating music that literally just creates a sense of anxiety and fear and tension, because that's what this game is about. You're always being hunted down. You can't kill anybody. You are literally have to hide and get out. Mm-hmm. And you can do it with your friends at the same time.
Well, first of all, we come trick-or-treating to your place this year. But I mean, you talked a little bit about it just now. But I mean, can you talk more about the difference? I mean, really, is there what's specific about scoring for horror video games, and how do you avoid kind of falling into cliches or film horror scoring cliches? Can you talk about the difference?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a big one for me because I really have to come in and bring something very different and unique and original, but at the same time cater to exactly what the client is looking for. So we did spend time, I'll call it sandboxing and experimenting with a certain, again, musical recipe, right? Of course, there's going to be the typical aleatoric, Paderewski kind of, is that the right composer? Or was that the jet lag? Okay. Yeah, that kind of stuff, aleatoric, and that's easy, and that's great. It's very effective, and certainly I do use some of that. But what is it that makes this game different, right? So we'd lean into a lot of the time frame, 1959. Okay, let's keep... So even just melodically and musically, even with that motif of the... It almost kind of reminds me of a classic horror film that was a little bit simple and quirky, maybe a little Bernard Herrmann, early Bernard Herrmann stuff. So there was that, but there was also a dynamic, like you can't make it too epic sounding, Like they didn't want any big reverberant brah. It was all very claustrophobic. So even when I did percussion, I had to find the right way to present that in the context of this. And you know, there's also other organic qualities to it, to the point that some of the music and sound I built into the music was done just with like my mouth. There was one cue in a scary ride called the Root Canal. And I'm like, okay, root canal, inside a mouth, and it was really blech. And so I literally created sounds with my mouth and voice that became part. And when you listen to the score, it does have this unique thing. It's not like a typical horror score, you know? And some of it is melodic, and some of it is not, and everything in between.
Have you ever scored for horror film also, or?
I haven't done a horror film. I've done other horror
horror
games earlier in my career, but this one I say is probably the most ambitious, where it really goes all out in that genre. It was a lot of fun, and the implementation was very challenging and different because it's a multiplayer game, and the system of making the music work for all 4 players, 1 to 4 players, was fascinating because it's all synchronized. Most games don't do that. So there's this unprecedented music system that we kind of developed, and I give all the credit to the audio director and the sound design team, where if you know you're both doing, let's say if you're both in a certain area or whatever, all the music is synchronized, but the mix is different. Or the elements that you hear are different, but it's always synchronized, you know, across the world. You know, it's amazing.
Can someone, or maybe you, Tom, talk a little bit about is there a difference between scoring single player versus multiplayer, and what are the technical differences when it comes to music?
It's really not so much about the number of players. It's really about the way they decide to implement the music, right? So how many different pieces, what kind of pieces? Again, is it going to be vertical, like are there going to be layers that are going to come in and out? And why? What are they for? That always informs the way that it's going to be implemented and the way that the files are going to be delivered. You see? So, and it all depends, you know. I've never, well, I don't like saying never, but seldomly does a client ask me for, let's say, stems just for the sake of remixing something. It's usually like, just give me the components that are going to be controlled separately in the game. For example, when I was doing Deathloop, it would be just the exploration music, and then the only other thing that could play on top of that was this tension layer. So I would every time I created a piece of music, let's say a 2-minute musical piece of exploration, I'd write an additional part that makes it feel tense. You know, so let's just say it's a little trill, you know, as a little string, dee 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 dee, and I would have it always there through the whole thing, following the harmonic progression, but knowing full well that it would only come in and out like if you were sneaking and there was someone right around the corner. So it depends. That's why it's important for good two-way communication with the team, because then they will explain what they have in mind, and then sometimes that gets changed and altered along the way. But it's good as a composer to understand what the possibilities are of the middleware, even if you're not a pro in programming it like me. I can't work in Wise or anything like that. But I know what it can do, and that helps us come up with solutions.
Cool. George, you talked a little bit about your project earlier. You also brought a scoring session clip. Do you want to?
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's making a video of the main theme of the game, and I think that the most special thing about it is that when you write music for films, most of the time you write music for 2 people sitting in a kitchen, and one of them is looking dramatically over the window, and there it is. But here you can, in video game music, you can really go big, even if it's like an indie game, for example. So I had the pleasure of conducting a huge number of musicians in Sofia, Bulgaria, in Prague. We also did the sessions in Johannesburg, so it was a real pleasant journey.
Can you talk a little bit, especially for audience that might have not been part of recording sessions before? We've seen like there's a great team there. Can you talk a little bit like what team do you feel is important for a recording session that you assemble that really supports you and that is needed?
That's a very good question. I think that from pre-production side nowadays, it's very important, first of all, to have a really good orchestration team, also copying, because sometimes this is often neglected. And when you get to a recording session, time starts flying quite quickly. So if there are any errors in the parts, you notice it immediately. And so copying is very important. I had my assistant do it, Velisłava, and also the orchestrator on the project was Simon Edward, who would take my MIDI mockups, basically transcribe them, because I do a very detailed mockup. And then afterwards I would probably do some changes here and there. And then when you get to the recording studio, it's also very important to have somebody in the control room. In my case, because I like to conduct my music, I have a master's degree in conducting. I would never conduct a live concert because just the rehearsals are not for me. But conducting my music in the studio, that's a dream, basically a dream come true. But in that case, you need an ally that stands in the control room and somebody you can trust. And I had some real good friends from Folk Music, Sofia, Bulgaria, who were supervising the sessions for me. Because, you know, as I'm sure that everybody here knows how stressful it is when you're at the end, closer to the recording session, and you've been all alone in a studio, you know, working, and any sort of help that you can get, it's very important.
Unfortunately, I was just told that we took a bit longer, so I was lying. We're not doing audience questions, but we are all going to the awards tonight, so I'm sure there's opportunities to have one-on-one conversations, maybe after this panel or at night. Let's do one quick final round, starting with Barbie. Just very quick answer. What is a tool or an element, something you learned late, you learned scoring for video games that you wish you would have known earlier, that is really helpful and that, you know, you feel like is practical?
Just, it's going to depend like on who you're working with, but ask questions. Like, feel free to like talk to the developers. Like, sometimes with film, people they get annoyed or they get nervous when you ask them too many things. Or like, and I've noticed with games, they really like talking about their game. They're very passionate about it, and so just dive all in. Like, keep communication open with them as much as possible.
I think it's important to trust your instincts. I think, you know, we've all spent a lifetime pursuing making music and expressing ourselves in that way, and then it's easy to second guess yourself when you have, you know, 7M3 and you're like, oh my God, again, drawing inspiration on something you feel like the well is dry. But sometimes I go back to earlier pieces of mine from 10 years ago that I was so stressed out, I can't believe, you know, how bad this is. And I think, no, actually there's like a strange naiveness to this that I need to get back to. I'm almost like too academic sometimes. So trusting that the music is in you and let it come out without over-intellectualizing it.
Nice.
Just echoing what you said before, communication is really important for me. So if I'm unclear on anything, I'm scoring a couple of games at the moment, and getting detailed briefs, getting references, getting descriptions, artwork, anything to paint a picture of the piece of music that you're writing from. So developing a really strong relationships with the audio director and the music team and the development team, sitting in on meetings, you know, have got nothing to do with audio and music and sound, but just understanding the game and just connecting with other, you know, Tales of Kenzera was a very small game, actually, an indie game. There were 30 people, which is quite big, you know, from my perspective. So just getting to know everyone and immersing yourself in the culture of the game, that's really valuable.
I think for me, looking back, the biggest difference between the process when I was making games earlier and now is probably all in my mental state, in the creative process. Earlier, I was always, wanted to just get right into it and start writing the best music anyone's ever heard immediately, right? And now what I've realized is there's a certain dynamic, there's a certain natural ebb and flow to this creative process that we all can tap into at any time. And I feel that for me, it was about allowing some time at the beginning of a project to just simmer, to sit, to think, to research, to become inspired, to absorb what we're working on, to just do that immersion, kind of like a character actor who really studies that character they're going to play, and transforms that. When you take that time at the beginning, it pays off in spades later. And to allow yourself to be an inner child and sandbox and to experiment with, just do stuff that no one has to hear, because it just allows that the freedom. No kindergartner has a writer's block, right? It's like, here's some crayons, draw. They go, yeah, sure, but only adults do, because we have that voice. So learning to observe that inner voice and acknowledge that. Meditation has helped me with that a lot. That's a big change in my creative process and what I do every day. So I think that would probably be the biggest focus. And then not to waste so much time running stems. I think I've wasted about 5 years of my life. So I wouldn't have waited so long to create software for Logic called Auto Bounce. That is a shameless plug, but I use it every day. So anyway, thank you.
George.
Well, it took me about 20 years to learn one thing. All of these points are very, very valid, but I want to specify that I've always felt, this is something that I spoke with Anthony Willis today. So I've always felt like super bad when I was getting my music rejected, and I felt that people reject me as a composer, so you're not good enough. But it's not that. It's just, the music is not suitable for that project. And the sooner I learn, I wish I learned that sooner. But now I'm in such a position, maybe meditation as well, that I understand that the bigger goal is to tell a story creatively with a bunch of other people. So you have to leave your ego. Yeah.
Most definitely.
Kind of piggybacking off of you two guys, I think going from like the starting of my career, you kind of have an ego problem and you want to try to impress people. Like, I'm writing this big crazy piece of music and it's got all this stuff going on, and if that doesn't fit, then what's the point? So I think there's a big thing to say about putting your ego aside, and ultimately, as game composers or film composers, we're fulfilling somebody else's vision, and you have to embrace that and write what fits best, not what you think is best.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking the hour and sharing your insights. Congratulations on your nominations, and fingers crossed for tonight. And big round of applause for Video Game Composer of the Year composers.